We have a collaborative team at Baylor that includes myself, Taraj Saluki, he's an analytical chemist, Allison Clyatt, who's here today, she's our functional textiles specialist. Drew Stoltman is a PhD student that's solely going to be working with us on our projects that we're doing related to firefighter turnout gear. Lee Greathouse is a cancer biologist, so we're kind of rounding out our team and feel like we've got a lot to offer up as we ramp up our research. And for resources, there's a host of laboratories listed there, but I would like to just call out Mesa Fire and Medical Department because they've been great collaborators for us, and we really enjoy being here and working with them. So I'm just going to run through some things that you're probably familiar with some of them. This is just a list of cancers and other health risks that that you're at higher risk of because of the chemical contamination that's out there. So there's a whole host of cancers. There's cardiovascular disease, neurodevelopmental effects, endocrine system disruption, and they might not all lead to cancer, but they can add complications where you really just don't need any. Routes of entry, so there is other researchers out there doing things and providing evidence that helps us to understand a little bit of where we're headed. During a fire, your risks are primarily through inhalation and absorption, just like Captain Figgins talked about. The neck and hands are generally the most contaminated. Post-fire, though, your biggest risk is recontaminating yourself with your own gear. So figuring out those protocols where you can get a clean, just get a clean start with clean equipment, clean gear, clean bags, the whole thing, becomes paramount to being successful. Once these chemicals get into your system, some of them will remain local, like on the skin, and cause irritants and things like that. Some will become systemic and they'll get into your bloodstream, and that again creates more complications. Some of the issues that we found is looking at the textiles themselves. There's a variety of textiles being used in turnout gear. Different manufacturers do use similar variations of different things for all those different layers that are in your gear. But you're exposed to a range of chemicals through a fire, and the different textiles are going to respond to those differently. The problem is that there is no real effective maintenance strategy where you can come out of a fire, decon yourself, bag up your stuff, get your stuff decontaminated, clean yourself up, get your temperatures down, and then roll into some testing system where we can collect data and call you remedied and cleaned out. So there's different limitations to what we're doing and strategies that we're working on, trying to figure out how to get the data we need to help you on the front line. NFPA, there are two standards that I spent a lot of time with, 1971 and 1851. 1851 has just come up and has been updated. The interesting thing about the 1971 standard is it abdicates control of how to determine how to maintain your gear to the manufacturers. And they might know what's best in terms of what the textile is capable of doing, but what they think the textile should be doing might not be the same thing that your leaders in your fire department think. So they're trying to maintain the textile over a longer period of time so that you'll come back and buy that same gear, believing it to be good quality and lasting long, and because it's a big investment. But the reality is, if you're not deconning, if you're not getting the contaminants out of the textile, then you're back to recontaminating yourself every time you put your gear on. So one of the things that we're doing, I think that's a little different than most of the studies that we've been reading about chemical decon is the textile performance part of it. So we're combining both sides of that in our work so that we can determine what is the best way to decon your gear and at the same time not degrade the textile so that you get both the long life and the cleaner gear. So the study that Captain Figgins referred to, we had 3 sets of gear and a new set of gear. So we had 4 types of sampling that was going on. We had new gear, we had what we're calling as received, but the contaminated gear that wasn't changed in any way. We had gear that had been laundered with standard detergent, and then gear that was laundered with the D7 product that we were testing. And we did various studies. For Textile Performance, we looked at weight and thickness to see if those changes occurred in the textile. We used microscopy and visual inspection, fire resistance testing, water resistance testing, and abrasion resistance testing. All of these are standard tests that are conducted in a lot of different industries, but for sure in firefighters. And then chemical identification and decontamination, and classifying the chemicals that we found and looking at what could be removed with the products that we were testing. This is the microscopy results, so you can see a little bit about it. So the new and unused gear has that nice yellow color that looks with the new gear. And you can see what it looks like magnified considerably more here. And the second column is as received. So that's the contaminated gear that was not modified in any way in our study. And you can see the contaminants that show up on that gear pretty clearly. The standard detergent, you can see where, and this was after 20 launderings. That's when we looked at this. So with the standard detergent, you can see that a lot of the yellow is gone. So the color's changed. And there's still contaminants in the fibers. And then with the D7, a little bit of the yellow remained, so it didn't have the same effect as the detergent did in removing the color of the textile. But you can also see that there are fewer contaminants that's visible through microscopy. So that was really interesting for us to see. Let's see here. And then the other results from it, flame resistance, regardless of whether it was the new gear, the contaminated gear, the gear laundered by standard detergent or D7, they all sustained their, flame resistance in terms of what you would expect the gear to have. So there was no negative impact by the launderings in terms of flame resistance. Water resistance, we did 2 tests for that, and all of the gear that had been used, so the new gear, behaved like you thought it would, like you would think it would. It tested well for water penetration. The other 3 sets didn't fare so well, and they were worn gear that had been given to us that has a history that we're not aware of, so there's only so much that we can infer from that. But we do know that with the measurements that we took, D7 had a less of an impact than the standard detergent did. And then the abrasion resistance, all of the textiles that were laundered had issues with abrasion resistance. And again, we don't know the history of the gear and where it had been and how it had been taken care of. So the best we can say is that laundering might have affected abrasion resistance and wear might have affected it. We imagine that both of those things to be true. In terms of chemical identification, we did a limited measurement of a set of chemicals, right? So we had PAHs, we had organophosphates, we had some pesticides in there. And out of the limited panel of tests that we ran, this is the list of carcinogens or probable or possible carcinogens that came out of the turnout gear that we tested. So I think there's like 17 of them on here. The little numbers or the acronym for EPA on there, the numbers are in reference to the IARC system. That's the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So they have numerical numbers for theirs. A 1 is carcinogen, a 2A is probable, a 2B is possible, a 3 is it's still on the list, but there's not enough data. There's not enough data to remove it from the list, and there's not enough data to make it a 2A or a 2B. So you can kind of see how those pan out. The EPA, their list is a little different, but they haven't been accepted by IARC yet, those that have the EPA designation by them. But they're definitely chemicals of concern that, showed up in the gear. These are the other chemicals. They happen to all fall into the organophosphate esters and pesticides category that were not carcinogens, but have definite health effects and health risks associated with them. So it's just an alphabet soup of names there. But you can see, skin and eye irritation, respiratory distress, intestinal or muscular discomfort or disruption, endocrine disruption, neurotoxicity, acute toxicity, and death. I mean, that's a pretty broad range of health risks associated with the chemicals that was in this gear. So one of the things that we were doing was testing D7 and its effectiveness on decontaminating the gear that we were given. And what we found was that out of the 23 chemicals that we identified, just from the selection of chemicals we were looking for, D7 removed 18 of those. The 5 that were left, we believe that a different dosage of the amount, because we were doing this in a laundering, there was no gross decon that was done prior to it, it was just the laundering. And so, we think that those, we talked to the chemist who has the patent on the product, and, we talked about how we might change the dosage and run some new tests to determine if that's something, if we can catch those other 5 that we were already looking for. But, it's pretty impressive to get to this point. 11 of those were associated with carcinogenic activity, and 7 of them were the organophosphates with the other health risks that we talked about. So for us, what's next is, we want to get an answer to this dosage situation, because if we know what's the most effective dosage for chemical decon without degrading the textile, then that becomes our set point for the future research that we do. We have some analyses going on right now with the study that I just spoke about, looking at the quantities of those, because we want to know, like, of those 5 that were left, for instance, how much were they reduced, that they still registered and showed up, but they weren't necessarily at 100% anymore. But we're running some new analyses to try and figure that out. Just today, I literally finished conducting a before and after study on a cab out of Station 201. We literally, finished doing everything, packed everything up, jumped in the car, and drove here. So, what we did was we took samples before, and then they deconned and went through that process. We let it dry, and then we came back and resampled. So we'll take those samples back with us to the lab to analyze and see how this product performs in that scenario in a cab environment. My interest is more of a holistic approach. So we're starting with turnout gear, but we believe that, firehouses need to be evaluated. You want to make sure that you're not tracking this stuff into your home environment with your family and spreading that exposure there. So there's a lot of different things that we can do along the way to figure out how to minimize the transmission of these contaminants from your turnout gear to all through the chain of, on your cab, into the firehouse, and towards your home. Like, there's a whole big picture here in terms of protecting yourself and your family and each other, that really we need to figure out a solution for. And there's a lot of good people out there working on a lot of interesting things to try and figure that out. So we hope that there's a boost of activity, not just what we're doing, but what other people are doing too. The protocols that y'all are talking about developing, we want to look at the best way to do that. I've personally seen videos of the air, trying to blow stuff off, trying to brush stuff off, using water to decon. There's a new study out that shows using water to decon actually increases the contaminant levels on the samples they took afterwards. So, what might seem like a logical solution isn't necessarily an answer for what you want to do. So there's still a lot of unknowns out there. We're interested too in taking this, working on this chemical contamination thing, because that's right in front of us. But we also know that a lot of your activity is on medical calls. And so knowing that you're, disinfecting your gear or your clothing that you're wearing on those calls is as important as, deconning the chemicals. And all of this will lead, what we're pushing for is getting the data that we need to file for a federally funded study that would become a bigger, more substantial amount of work that can be a mean to an end here.